Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Friday, May the 7th, 2021. On this edition of the Politicrat, have you seen the Labour Party lately? An autopsy of sorts, and a look at the terrible Tories. Coming up next.
I'm proud of the difference Labour makes in power. And I'm proud of you, our supporters, who've worked so hard to get Labour elected. From knocking on doors to joining phone banks, every one of you has played an integral part. And for that, I want to say thank you.
Everything that you've done will help us towards making sure that we get the result we want. And I want to say a huge thank you for all the work and the effort that you've put in our Labour family. Whether that's through donations, whether that's on the doorstep, or whether that's through being a councillor, being a mayor, being a police and crime commissioner, or being one of our fantastic candidates.
Together, we can make Britain the best country to grow up in and the best country to grow old in, whoever you are, wherever you live.
Labour just did not have it last night, and that's the overall takeaway from where I sit here in San Francisco, California, for whatever it's worth, which is probably, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, and at the very least, not a whole hell of a lot. But Labour were embarrassed. They had their pants pulled down last night. They had their proverbial stockings absolutely ripped. I mean, snagged. And it was not a good sight for Labour last night, as voters across the United Kingdom sent a very strong message, particularly in England, that Labour is not wanted. And that's just, to me, staggering, because I knew that the Conservatives were going to prevail in a number of these particular elections yesterday and the by-elections. I had been saying this on a few episodes, one episode at least, a few weeks ago now. Last month it was. And one of the things I was asking, dear listener, was how on earth is it that people continue to vote for the Conservatives despite everything? What is it about that party? Why is it that people are continuing to vote for Conservatives? And I don't think I've really got an answer from anybody yet, but I really would like one. Why is it that people continue to vote for a party that is the party of austerity, that has put more people on the dole, that has got a miserable track record of helping the people who need help the most in the society, who absolutely have made massive cuts over the last 10 plus years to the police in the United Kingdom, who have continued to violate laws and flout rules and get tied in with billionaire owners and investors and do all kinds of things that have nothing to do with governing the people and working on their behalf and in their best interest. Why is it that with all of that, people continue to vote for that party? And I'm not talking about the Republicans in the US. I'm talking about the Conservatives in the UK. For the life of me, I don't know. I think alternatively, I could ask, why hasn't Labour been able to figure things out? Why is it that the Labour Party continues not to learn from its previous failures? Why is it that the Labour Party has now become tantamount to either a laughingstock, a disgrace, or an inanimate object? It's very puzzling to me. And I'm someone who is a Labour supporter. It's really troubling to me why this party, the party that established the National Health Service, the NHS, the party that devised that service, Nan Bevan, back in the 1940s, I think it was, 47 or 48 was when the NHS was established. By Labour. I don't understand, by Nan Bevan. I don't understand why the Labour Party, who is traditionally in England the party of the poor, the working class, the working poor, the hard scrabble, roll up your sleeves worker, I don't understand why that party is failing so miserably to connect to the very people that its whole base and its whole DNA is supposed to be connected to and about. I find it perplexing. I find it to be disturbing. And I think there are some answers to be had here. I don't want to just keep rolling out the questions, rhetorical or otherwise. But I would say that the reason why I think Labour is failing to connect and failing to get the votes that it really should be getting against a decrepit Tory government and Tories across the UK is because Labour lacks an identity. At the moment, Labour doesn't have a solid identity. And if you don't know who you are, especially in politics, if you do not know who you are, how on earth are you going to have a clear and coherent message? And how on earth are you going to know what your message is? What your message is? Who your message is about? Who it's directed to? And what your plan is? If you don't know what your identity is, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what the goals are, if you don't have a clear vision, then you make it very easy for voters. Voters can be a very fickle lot. And in some countries, they can be even more fickle than fickle. One thing here in the US is that voters are fairly tried and true to the parties that they vote for. I mean, that doesn't always happen, of course. People switch around and vote for different people. And in the UK, I don't know that that's necessarily true. There are people who are entrenched in certain voting patterns, but I think that it's much more fluid over there. I really do. I just cannot imagine. I cannot imagine that a party that got blown away in 2019 in the UK general election, I'm talking about Labour, its worst loss in an election, general election, since 1935, would now, 2 years after their 2019 butt whooping, would somehow manage to not learn from its own mistakes and its own defeat. I am really at a loss at which to understand that. But quite frankly, I think it's pretty darn easy to understand why Labour lost, and lost so badly last night. And I think it's because the Labour Party's bosses are speaking to a very narrow slice of the party and trying to put a working class gloss on the message. And it's not working. And I think voters can see through it. There is no way that the Labour Party should ever have lost Hartlepool. Hartlepool is probably, I don't know, less than half an hour south of Sunderland. Now, if you're talking geography in the UK, you've got the four nations, Northern Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland. Those are your four nations within the United Kingdom. Hartlepool is located in the northeast of England. Newcastle is right near the border of Scotland, not too far away from the Scottish border, almost at the border. You've got Sunderland, and then you've got Hartlepool, which is a little bit further down. It's roughly, I think, southeast of Sunderland. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 30 miles southeast, 25, 30 miles southeast of Sunderland. Those parts of the northeastern English area, the northeast of England. And Hartlepool had been for nearly 50 years a Labour stranglehold. Count on Hartlepool to vote Labour. Even Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 kept Hartlepool in the Labour column. Last night, Sir Keir Starmer did not. And for the first time in its 47 years, and by the way, the Conservative who won misspoke and said 57 years, and I then tweeted that out too, but it's not true. It's 1974 was when this seat was created, to the best of my knowledge now, so I got that wrong. 1974. That would be 57 years. So 47 years, excuse me. Oh, goodness me. You got me doing it now. So for the first time in nearly 50 years, a Conservative member of Parliament was elected. Someone was elected as a Conservative in that Hartlepool seat, which is just absolutely embarrassing. That speaks to something deeper to me. That speaks to something that is going on not just in the country, but going on in the Labour Party. The Labour Party is not only at a crossroads, but it now is in a place where its identity crisis is beyond doubt. There's no doubt that there's an identity crisis in Labour. There's no doubt that there is a crisis of confidence in Labour in the country. And there's no doubt that because the vaccine rollout has been going very well, it made things difficult for Labour to begin with. And I will start to transition to talk about why I think the Conservatives did so well. That's going to be one of the things. But I want to stick a pin in this with Labour. Labour is never going to get back to anything of prominence and power if it doesn't begin to fine-tune its message and return to its working class roots. The problem with Jeremy Corbyn back in 2019 was, although he was pushing those kinds of values in the party, he was not the ideal leader of the party in the eyes of a lot of people, not just amongst the voting electorate, but also amongst people in the Labour Party. And that 50-year struggle within the Labour Party certainly is another big reason why Labour did not prevail. And I think that has been as much a story as anything the Conservatives did or didn't do last night in order to win such a wide number of seats. They gained at least, close to 30 seats in these by-elections. And you should not be having the party in power in government gaining all these seats. That should not be going on. So that's the thing. Usually in by-elections, it is the party who is the opposing party, the opposition party, that makes these gains. It's tantamount to what happens, I think, in some ways here in the US when you have the midterm elections. And usually the midterm elections are won, or a lot of gains are picked up by the party that is not in power on the national stage. So, for example, in the case of this present government in the United States, Democrats control the White House, Democrats control the House, Democrats control the Senate. And there are already expectations that for next year, 2022, when the midterms arrive, that Republicans are going to make some gains in the House and in the Senate and maybe in some state houses as well. We'll see. We'll see. It may happen, it may not happen. But usually that's the trend. The party that wins the White House usually loses the midterm elections the following year or so, or two. So that is fairly consonant, but not always consonant. But in the case of these by-elections in the United Kingdom, the party that is opposing is the party that should be winning these seats. It's not the party in power that should continue to grab more seats, more seats, more seats. There's something wrong with that picture. And that tells me that Labour have a lot more work to do, that Labour is making big mistakes, like scandalizing everything that Boris Johnson does, which at the end of the day was not a good idea. And obviously, the kind of playbook that Hillary Clinton played from her poor campaign strategists, who really gave her some really bad advice for the second time. I think that some of them may have found their way into the Labour Party, or just the Labour Party is inept, because you don't focus on Boris Johnson's flat. Most people in England do not care about Boris Johnson's flat and its refurbishments. Of course, yeah, they may, like I do on Twitter, throw tomatoes from the peanut gallery with some tweets and say, yeah, this guy doesn't give a rat's ass about the working person. And he doesn't. He doesn't. He's an Etonian, He's an Eton lad. He doesn't give a rat's, right? But the average person in England also is trying to put food on the table, trying to keep a roof over their head, trying to navigate the costs of all kinds of things, education costs, this cost, that cost, the other costs, everything else. They don't have time to be outraged about Boris Johnson's drapes and his wallpaper. And I just think that Sir Keir Starmer, who is now, of course, the leader of the Labour Party and has been now for just over a year, and his team have got to start refashioning what the focal point for Labour is going to be. That's obvious, right? That's not some, hey, presto analysis from yours truly. That's something that I think anybody who follows these affairs from miles away or up close with a microscope or magnifying glass knows that this is the case. And I think that Sir Keir Starmer now really has to reboot Labour and reboot what Labour is and bring it back to its working class roots and speak to the broadest base of people. No publicity stunts and going into places, DIY stores, do-it-yourself stores, and then going and looking at wallpaper and all this nonsense. that is not something that's going to resonate. And when you don't have a personality that is vibrant and exciting doing that kind of PR stunt, it falls on deaf ears. It looks lame and tame. If Boris Johnson had done that very same thing, and Boris Johnson was in the party out of power, let's say the Conservatives were out of power and Sir Keir Starmer was in power, and it was Sir Keir Starmer who was, rumored to have, had all this wallpapering done and done with taxpayer money or with, whomever, and it was Boris Johnson that was running that publicity stunt, that would have worked. Why? Because whatever I or you or some of you and others, people out there, may say about Boris Johnson, he knows how to do a publicity stunt. And in this social media addled world that we live in, for better or for worse, and very often it's for worse, it is people who know how to utilize publicity and the media spotlight and have the kind of personality in which to do that that gains attention from the average person, no matter what kind of person they are. I mean, we can look at Donald Trump, same thing. No matter what kind of person he is, and he's a scumbag, he knows how to get attention, and his personality ain't the best, for sure. But he knows how to shout fire in a crowded theater, which is what makes him extremely dangerous. If Sir Keir Starmer shouted fire in a crowded theater, nobody would move a muscle. And that's what scares me, because we need a leader in the Labour Party who is going to throw some deck chairs out and start to raise alarms and start to speak passionately to the people. This Labour Party ain't doing that. You cannot have milquetoast leaders and expect to have whopping, firecracking results.
Gillian Wendy Mortimer, commonly known as Jill Mortimer, Conservative Party candidate, 15,529.
And that was the moment in which the Conservatives made history in Hartlepool last night, or I should say early this morning, in Hartlepool in England, where I was telling you earlier in the episode that history had been made. The first time ever that the Conservatives had won Hartlepool, which is a reliably Labour town. That seat has gone to Labour for all of the previous elections in Hartlepool's history. Hartlepool was actually created as a town district for a seat back in 1974. I mean, this is the first time that seat went Conservative, just a few hours ago, in its 47-year history. This is not the way things are supposed to be for a political party that, well, it's just not supposed to be like that. I mean, look, I'm not someone who's for entrenchment, because entrenchment of power leads to all kinds of horrible things. And it can. It doesn't always. But I'm not for entrenchment of power really for any political party, even though I am a Labour Party supporter, even though I am a Democratic Party supporter. I mean, we've seen how that has happened with Democratic Party power entrenched in some of these districts, in some of these cities in the United States. And the, William Lacey Clay family, the Clay family, had controlled the seat in the 1st District of Missouri, that area in St. Louis, for something like almost 60 years. And I'm not for that kind of thing, where a family, a generation upon generation of a family's political progeny gets to stay there. You know, the Clay family, well, Clay number one and Clay the second and Clay like it's some kind of monarchy, you know, that it just gets handed down to the next heir in line. I'm not for that. That kind of thing is not on. And not on for me, certainly, and not on. It's not good. It happens, though, right? These dynasties, you know, Bush, Clinton, Bush, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, and then it's your turn, and then it's your turn, and then it's Joe Biden's turn, and then it's... That's what I don't like. It is a reality of these systems, and I don't like it. And I think we can do better, and we can change it. But it is the Kennedys, a political dynasty, you know, these. So, and this happens across the spectrum politically on a number of occasions, but among people who are very rich. And the bottom line here is that I'm not for entrenchment of power, but I'm also not for political parties like Labour not being able to do enough to hold on to a working class constituency. If you are a party that speaks to that, or speaks to those groups, then you've got to do enough to hold on to those groups. And Labour just, I think, took a lot of the constituencies for granted, like the Democratic Party here often does, I think, takes constituencies for granted. Black voters, brown voters, you know, the usual. And I think it happens in England as well. It happens in a lot of places. I just think it happens in England as well, where you've got people who are not doing enough to hold on to the voters who brought them to the dance. And the Conservative victory in Hartlepool is an example of this, but it's also an example of the kind of momentum that the Conservatives have realistically. And yes, the right-wing media does play a role in this in England. It definitely does play a role. But also there is a sense of people liking the leader of the party, who is also the Prime Minister. There are people who really like this guy. And I think some of the people who like him can't necessarily explain why they like him, but they know they do. That's my view. And I think there's lots of people who can explain in England and in Wales, but in England, obviously, why they do like Boris Johnson. Some people will say, well, you know, he's got flaws. He's like us, you know. Yeah, he's got flaws. He makes mistakes. He doesn't comb his hair. But the thing is, Boris Johnson is an Etonian. Boris Johnson is a very well-off person. He doesn't care about the average working-class person. He doesn't. He's so removed from that. It's just incredible. But yet, that's the message, right? You get this pseudo-populist, because Boris Johnson to me is not a real populist. You get this strategy in these right-wing parties. Let's develop a pseudo-populist and pretend that we really like the people that we are trying to get the votes of. And let's invest there. And let's do a stunt and a publicity stunt here, publicity stunt there. And let's do all of that. And let's get these folks to vote for us. And let me tell you something. Obviously, I mean, that strategy's been working.
A massive thank you to, first of all, to the people of Hartlepool for placing their confidence in us, in the Conservatives. I want to congratulate Jill on a fantastic campaign. I think that she's been a wonderful candidate and fought very, very hard for every vote. And I think she'll be a wonderful MP. And for me, what this means is that I think that it's a mandate for us to continue to deliver. for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the northeast, but across the whole of the country. And I think if there's a lesson out of this whole election campaign, the whole local election campaign across the whole of the UK, it's that the public want politicians to get on with focusing on their needs and their priorities. So coming through the pandemic and making sure that we then build back better, and you can see some of the evidence of economic confidence that the Bank of England's been talking about, the prospect of a really strong rebound in the second half of the year. I think people want us to focus on that. And I think that here in Hartlepool, clearly people this is a place that voted for Brexit, and we got Brexit done, and then we're able to do other things thanks to that.
And he's absolutely right. Boris Johnson's right for once. And those are some of the very reasons why the Conservatives won so overwhelmingly last night. And some of the votes are still being counted, by the way, and all of that, at least as I record this episode. But yeah, he absolutely gets that right for a change. The economy is looking up in the UK. The likelihood is that it is going to rebound now. And it's inevitable that the economy, after having a lot of major dips, major troughs last year, obviously over this past year plus, is going to end up rebounding again once people get vaccinated. And they are. That's another thing you cannot overlook. And I think I may have mentioned that earlier. I'm going to talk now for a few minutes about why I think the Conservatives did so well. And I've talked about why Labour floundered so poorly and so spectacularly floundered and did so poorly last night. But I'm going to talk about why the Conservatives did so well. And one of the reasons is what's happened with the vaccinations. The vaccinations have gone very, very well in the United Kingdom. That cannot be denied. I'm happy that it has, by the way. I'm not going to sit here and begrudge that. And I think the Conservatives did a massive rebound after what you saw with that disastrous track and trace program, which was just pathetic. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, absolutely had egg on his face with this track and trace program that just never worked. It never really worked at all. The app didn't work, this didn't work, that didn't work. It was a disaster, a spectacular disaster. All of this locking down and not locking down, and I'm not going to lock down, and I'm going to, or I'm not going to, or I have to. That was all forgotten by the voters when they voted yesterday. Why? Because a vaccine came along in the first week of December of last year, and boom. That was the elixir for many people in the UK. And the rates of death have fallen dramatically over the last few months since this vaccine has come. Yes, there were problems, of course, with AstraZeneca. And by the way, there are alternatives being brought now in the UK to the AstraZeneca vaccine, or their recommendations for it as a precautionary measure, even though and despite the fact that the rates of blood clotting are extremely low, and vis-a-vis AstraZeneca. We have a lot of people vaccinated. I think it's something like 13 million people fully vaccinated in the United Kingdom now, which you might not think is a lot, but when you think about the fact that the UK population is roughly 67 million people, that's actually really damn good. That really is. You're talking a quarter of the country, just about, if my math serves me correctly. Just under 25% of the country is fully vaccinated now. Again, my math, a little suspect, but no, I think I'm right there. It's less than 25. It's about 22% or so of the country, 20%, 22% of the country that's been in that. And I think that's really good. Now, it has to keep going. But you're seeing places begin to open. There have been experiments in Liverpool. Have a couple of events there, 3,000 people last week. Last Friday, I think it was 3,000 people in a crowd together. No masks, no nothing, no physical distancing. Experiments trying to open things up again. You heard Boris Johnson talking about, well, May 17th, we're going to do this and do that. We're going to start to open a few things up and have experiments here and there and blah, blah, blah. And then if all goes well on June 21st, we're going to just open up the whole shop. We're going to have no social distancing, no mask requirements, nothing. You can go back into bars, you can go back into restaurants, you can do everything you want. And those are the kinds of things I think also help to spur people to vote for the Conservatives. And I think it's pure luck. A lot of this in politics is pure luck. It really is. It is a sense of timing. I'm not trying to say that Boris Johnson doesn't get credit here, because as much as I don't like Boris Johnson, he has been able to, with all of this garbage that he has produced and the sleaze, he has been able to navigate, and he's done it time and time again, to navigate these choppy waters that he puts himself in, that he creates. And the mark of a successful politician, I'm not saying he's a good politician, maybe he is a good politician for some people, but in terms of the tactical aspects, he is successful in that. He has a right-wing media that helps him immensely. He has a certain level of political calculation that cannot be denied. His whole role in weakening and undermining his predecessor, Theresa May, is just legendary. It really is. And I'm going to talk more about the Conservatives and why they were so successful right after this. Welcome back. Listen, you have to give credit where credit's due. The Conservatives were able to successfully advance the cause of what they were doing regarding optimism, and that's what they do. They try to make gold out of a pig's ear, even though everybody knows that it's a pig's ear in front of them. But there are voters who revel in fantasy land. And they want to hear positivity, even if positivity is clearly nowhere near them. And Boris Johnson, one thing he does, and does well, is he's able to speak with puffery and exaggeration and bluster and lies. He lies very well sometimes. He's not the greatest liar, but he lies enough and fervently enough and with enough theatrics that ropes in the average person who says, yeah, he makes me believe. And people like that are always very effective, no matter what the detritus says, no matter what it says, the kind of detritus that this man lays in his wake. It's really obvious that this guy is a liar and a tin pot and an absolute psychopath. But the average voter wants to have their aspirations massaged and stroked and coddled too. And why not? Why shouldn't a voter want to vote for someone who has a sunny outlook? I wish that voters would vote for people who tell the truth, but there aren't very many truth tellers to vote for in this world when it comes to politics. But you know what I mean. Someone who's authentic. not someone who lies in order to try to be authentic, Boris Johnson. But that's where we stand with the Conservatives. And they are the party in charge, in power. They have been absolutely devastatingly bad. And what you're seeing is a party now that is the beneficiary of being in the right place at the right time. The vaccination rollouts have been very good. I don't think anybody can say otherwise if they're really being honest. I don't think anybody can lay claim to the idea that that's not true. It's been a very successful rollout. People are being vaccinated. People want to return to a sense of quote unquote normalcy. I don't know what that is. Do you, dear listener? Do you know what normalcy is? I've got no idea what that is. Not that I don't know what the word means, but I'm talking about the concept that it brings. What is normalcy? Right? What is that? But anyway, the point is that people want to return to whatever they think that is. And whatever that is, it is Boris Johnson and the Conservatives who have been invigorating a spirit of let's get back into the game here. And it's worked. It's worked. And Labour are reacting. Labour have been so reactive instead of proactive. And reacting to things that to me are tiddlywinks. And Labour needs to start pushing an identity about what they're for, as I said. But the Conservatives are the beneficiaries of being in the right place at the right time. And now are going to have an economy that is going to start to move on the upswing. For some people. And are the beneficiaries of being in power when a vaccine has been approved and it has gone out and the rollout has been largely very, very good. It's one of the best rollouts in the world. Now, of course, I've talked many times about how both the UK and the US are stockpiling vaccine. I've been very, very critical of it. There is definite truth, though, to the fact, and well, it's obviously truth, it's a fact, that this rollout arguably is the thing that has helped Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. The way this vaccine rollout has gone, it's been very smooth, it's been largely very effective. Sure, you heard about those 6 cases or those few, very, very few cases where there have been blood clots, but in the AstraZeneca vaccine, but the vaccine rollout in the UK has gone and worked like a charm. And I think Boris Johnson now is continuing really to build. This is another reason why I think the Conservatives won. They're continuing to build off their momentum from 2019 when they absolutely decimated Labour in that election, in the general. Then they ended up, as I said, winning overwhelmingly last night. They had their biggest win in 2019 since 1935, trouncing Labour in that general election 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now. And now they've got this sizable win in this by-election in 2021. It's clearly a momentum continuance for the Conservatives. You also have Brexit, this god-awful, disastrous thing that the corporate news media in the UK strangely, oh, wow, we're not talking about that anymore. And I think that that's a problem. I think that that's a real problem. I think now that Brexit is not being talked about because it's a disaster. It's a disaster, and because it's not being talked about, then, hey, it's just really what's going on here, It's what's going on here. So, that's the real issue. Brexit's doing so much damage. You saw what's going on in Jersey. We saw what's going on there with the ships in the channel and all the other stuff. That seems to have been resolved now. It has been resolved. But, again, about fishing rights, that's all that was about. and conflicts around that with the EU and with the UK, and Jersey and Brexit. It's a disaster, Brexit. Brexit has not been very good. And the right-wing news media has absolutely aided the Conservatives in this fact and not talking about how damaging Brexit has been. And Brexit has been really poisonous. It's been really, really poisonous. But if the media's not talking about it, who knows? Who knows how poisonous it is? If you don't read the right kinds of publications, The Guardian and others, how are you knowing that Brexit's doing all this damage? And if people aren't reporting on it, how do you know? Unless you're one of the people who is suffering as a result of Brexit. You need to get your podcast. Those of you who are suffering from Brexit and under it. This is the problem. So, folks, this is the deal here. And I think that the perception in the English public that Brexit is done, which it is done, but, again, there's still so many headaches behind it. That perception, the second part of the headaches, people don't think about that. They think, oh, it's done, boom, he got what he got done, and that's it. He's moving forward. And that's why I think people are voting for him and this party. And the messaging is better. Their messaging is better than the Labour Party's. And the difference is the Conservatives know who they are. They show you who they are. They're corrupt, they're this, they're that, the other. And people know it, and they don't care because at least they know that to their faces. They can see it, right? And they will put up with some of that in order to go with some of the other stuff that they think is good. The Labour Party, on the other hand, are all over the map, wishy-washy, too polite, too, I don't want to say anything. And that's the problem. So you've got two parties. One knows what it wants. The other one is kind of really consecrating its own power for the benefit of a few in the party and not looking at the populace that it's supposed to be advocating for. And maybe I'm being a little harsh on Labour there, but Labour, like the Democratic Party, have walked away from its traditional working class roots. And I think it's about time they return to them. The Conservatives, right now for them in the UK, the sky is the limit. And this rollout and this vaccine is going to continue to keep them in power, as is the economy. Once it starts to rebound, once people start to get into stores and shops and start going back to bars and restaurants and pubs and go inside those places, and they are going to boost the economic rebound. And the party in power, which is the Conservative Party, are going to benefit from that. That's just a fact. They are going to benefit from that. And I think that is the thing that people have to look at, and Labour has to look at. How are they going to deal with the fact that the populace of the country in the UK, in England particularly, but in the UK at large, are going to vote for a party that is in power when there's economic prosperity and a successful vaccine rollout? How is the Labour Party going to grapple with that, and what kind of messaging is it going to use in order to counteract it and try to get voters to vote for Labour again? I think you've got to start appealing to the working class again and do so without apology. That's one of the things they need to do. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. Dear listener, you have to go right now. Please, I want you to go to the Politicrat Daily Podcast online store because there's so much there waiting for you. So much. T-shirts, hats. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then you've got hoodies and pens and mugs. Oh my goodness me, it just never ends. I mean, you can get lost in there. You really can. So much more. Drinkware. Socks. That's right, socks. I mean, if you want to get fitted and kitted, this is the place to be. The Politicrat Daily Podcast online store. Shop there right now at the-politicrat.com. the-politicrat.myshopify.com. That's the-politicrat.myshopify.com. Thank you for your support.